Hey, welcome to another stream of the Assent. It is myself, Angela Erickson, as well as my favorite co-host, Nicholas Cavazos, also known as the Traditional Thomist. Thank you for joining me again tonight. I really appreciate you coming on. Now, how many episodes have we done? 3, 4 episodes together?
I think this is the fourth one.
Okay. Awesome. And just for anyone watching and listening, we're having technical difficulties on my end. So I don't know if you guys could tell us how it sounds for you, the listener. That would be great, because for me, I'm getting a huge echo, and every time Nicholas says something, it's like he has Tourette's or something, and he's repeating himself, or I don't know what's going on. So if there's a little bit of a delay on my end when I'm responding, okay, so it sounds fine. That's good. Thank you for letting us know. It must be just me. I don't know. It's me. I'm getting the spiritual warfare because I'm going on a silent retreat this weekend, and the enemy is very angry about that, I think.
Or it's that Yankee internet that you have up there, just low quality. You know, that could be a thing.
I don't live in Canada like the Blightons from Avoiding Babylon. Okay, I'm actually not too far from the Twin Cities. I am still in civilization, I promise.
You know, I'm gonna say to the viewer, if you're watching our show right now, as opposed to Avoiding Babylon, that goes to commitment to the meaning of Catholic, because the last time I find Avoiding Babylon anything on the meaning of Catholic channel. I don't know. It seems like a while for but
it's war. It is war now. Avoiding Babylon. I'm coming after you. I'm just kidding. I love you guys, but seriously, stop it.
Streaming on our time.
Stop it. No, that's okay. So anyway, tonight we wanted to talk about pro-life apologetics. So maybe for those of you who are new to my work at all, pro-life apologetics is kind of my wheelhouse. Oh, there's an echo for both of us. That's really interesting. That one person says we're fine, and someone else says there's an echo. I don't know what's going on. I wonder if it's StreamYard.
I do not either. I feel like I should just unplug my phone and see if it goes away. But if no change, then I feel like no clue then, because I've checked all my settings.
And so have I. My settings haven't changed anything. I've restarted my computer multiple times. We might end up. I'm not kidding. This is spiritual warfare, I think. I'm gonna double check my settings. I don't know what it would be.
I'm gonna unplug my mic, see what happens.
Okay. Well, yeah, we might have to restart the show here at some point. I don't know what it would be.
All right. So yeah, my natural computer voice. Father John says it's great. So
someone else. Yeah. Okay. So
maybe Julia Hauk is lying.
No, Julie. I don't know Julia, but I'm going to guess Julia is just a lovely human being, and she would never lie.
I do know Julia. I do know Julia, and lovely human being. I don't know about that. She's all right.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if you need headphones.
I can snag some.
Can you? Because I know sometimes that can be a problem. It's Julia says it's her. Julia says it's her.
So let me just snag some and just see what happens.
All right. So in the meantime, I guess I'll just talk about what we came on to talk tonight about is pro-life apologetics. I'll explain why that is. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with me and my work, I have been an anti-abortion activist for over a decade now. In college, I ran a pro-life organization at our extremely liberal state university for a year. And then I worked for Students for Life of America. I ran a pregnancy center for 2 years. I think I became their director when I was 23 years old. And after that, after my tenure there, I worked for LifeSite News, kind of behind the scenes doing fundraising for them. And in the meantime, throughout all of that, I have had extensive experience, I guess, doing pro-life apologetics, going out on college campuses and having conversations with many hundreds, if not thousands of young men and women about abortion, as well as professors and anyone else who happened to be on campus. And I have some really interesting stories. And I probably won't get into too many of those tonight, but boy, I can't imagine what it's like now, just a handful of years later. It was pretty antagonistic when I was a college student, and I mean, all of us have seen the videos of what's going on with the transgenderism battle that's just raging on these college campuses, and even the the pro-abortion activists, they tend to be of the same ilk, and so you're seeing the same animosity towards people like Kristen Hawkins and Students for Life America, people who are going to college campuses and trying to engage in the culture war by having conversations, these difficult conversations. And so, what we thought we would do tonight, in light of some of the tension that's rising with that conversation, especially in a post Roe America, we want to equip you to have meaningful, persuasive dialogue with uh, people who are pro-abortion. And Nicholas here, I think we're going to have him play the devil's advocate a little bit. Even though I sort of think you probably would also make excellent arguments. I think we could probably be evenly yoked, even though I've probably done more outreach than you, just because intellectually you understand what those arguments probably sound like. How much experience do you have studying pro-life apologetics?
I'd say I have a somewhat decent-ish, I guess, perspective to offer when it comes to the philosophical side. First off, can you hear
Hmm.
me all right? Is everything
Yeah,
sounding
I can
good
hear you
thus
great.
far?
And actually, I think the
Okay,
echo
that's
is
fine.
gone.
Okay, great. Oh, okay. Well, I guess we'll
Maybe the
figure that
battery's
out later. So when it comes to specifically the apologetical side, I think I have a unique perspective because a lot of the debates that I have seen when it comes to, videos online where pro-life advocates in the street and they'll just try to attempt a dialogue. Generally, a lot of the times, you do end up in the world of philosophy if they are willing to sit down and actually strike up a conversation. Once you get past the communistic sloganeering that they oftentimes will just throw at you and actually try to dialogue, um, you can actually learn quite a bit. And so a lot of times I notice that they'll come at it from different philosophical perspectives along the question of, when does life really begin? Does life really begin? What is this thing called an embryo? What is technically a human? Right? These are very philosophical questions. When I say philosophical, I don't just mean like, oh, abstract questions for a bunch of nerdy people up in an ivory tower. I mean, questions about fundamental things of life, like self. And so I've noticed that at least the more and more I've learned Thomism after becoming a Catholic, the more that sharpened my apologetic works with abortion beforehand, my denomination, if you will, Protestantism, since it was just so heavily Bible based, which wasn't a problem, it didn't have that philosophical sharpening. And so to just quote, thou shalt not murder to someone who doesn't even think that it's human is not really, because they could even just retort back, well, I agree, right? Don't murder people. But they're going to be like, I just don't believe it's a human. And
That's
so
right.
once you really start to dive down into just what is a human, what is life, what is a soul, things like that, I think you're really going to be able to get their brain. And the last thing I'll say is on that is just that, man's intellect is made for truth. You can think of our non-corporeal intellect. It's like, what is its purpose? It's to know things. It's to know things, to know truth, right? And it's ultimately to know God. But when we start to dilute the conversation down to just slogans or trying to get really clever sound bites on the news, just absolutely owning these libs, things like that, then it just like the
Nicholas
conversation falls
Cavazos
down.
destroys pro-abortion liberal. Yeah,
You will see that one day. Yes. No. So.
yeah.
Yes. No. So.
Well, that's really awesome. Yeah, I interned with an organization called Justice for All. I don't know if you're familiar with
Mm-hmm.
their work at all, but they do graphic image outreach on college campuses and a lot of
Interesting.
tabling and surveying. So they're not usually quite as intense as, say, for the Center for Bioethical Reform. They go out with very
Mm.
graphic aborted images. Same with Created Equal. They're in Ohio, but Justice for All is a little bit I don't know, more measured in their approach. Often they might ask or have a pamphlet and ask somebody, can I show you what an aborted fetus looks like at 12 weeks? And people can consent to that and say, yeah, I'll look at it. But they do some of the other graphic image displays as well that maybe don't have that opportunity for these triggered liberal college students. But I also did outreach with another organization called Equal Rights Institute. And if you are really interested in pro-life apologetics, I highly, highly recommend going to Equal Rights Institute and checking out their work. My friend Josh Brom runs this organization, and they are constantly refining their approach to relational apologetics with a strong background in philosophical thought. And so they're constantly looking at how to make pro-life arguments stronger and more persuasive, because I think really that's the heart of the issue, so to speak, is it's one thing to make a really good argument, but how can we be persuasive? That's so much more important. I studied argumentation and rhetoric in college for that reason, specifically because we can make arguments all day, but if we're not persuading anyone to change their mind, then there's really no point. You're just kind of screaming at a wall, or it's Twitter, right? It's everyone screaming into the ether their own ideas, and we're not really having a conversation. And that's really hard to do, especially when we live in such a pithy culture where we are rewarded for those short snippets, right? Like that's rewarding on a social level, and likes and clicks and everything else, because so and so destroyed so and so. But in reality, if we are in the culture war and our true desire is to convert hearts and minds to the truth and to show them the truth, we have to be more intentional about how we approach other people in dialogue. What do you think about that?
When you just gave the example of Twitter, it's just like, to have it manifest in the flesh, if you will, in the context of public square debates is just never healthy. And so I think what we need to recognize is that whether it's this issue or the issue with contraception or the transvestite issue that's going on right now, or whatever the issue may be, we have to recognize is that we, first off, as Catholics, have to understand what the truth is. Two, we're a witnessing to other people. St. Dominic would often use this phrase. He would say, like, if you can convert the intellect, the will naturally follow. And it's because, even though we do have a darkened intellect because of original sin, and are forgiven of that eternal debt in holy baptism, we're still going to have those niggling vestiges, if you will, allurements towards concupiscence toward evil, towards self-will, and things along that nature. But will is not made for truth and made for love. And so therefore, what we have to do is we first have to understand the truth. Second, live out the truth, but then pull on what they know, right? In the context of these public debates, right? What makes a person alive? Is it? It can't just be his blood pumping through him from the heart. Like what sets that off? What makes that alive? It doesn't just start combusting and starting to be alive at random, right? It has to be something else.
Yeah.
No one knows, I guess. In and out. I can pull the headphones out and try. So.
Yeah. I was noticing I was still having the repeating, but I thought maybe that was just me. Yeah, I don't know. These tech issues, I'm not kidding. I think it is spiritual warfare, because I've been praying for months to get an opening on a silent retreat, because I just have had a lot going on in my personal life. And like, I need some guidance, and I also need time away from my kids. I love them. God bless them. But it's hard to hear God's voice when you have 5 kids who constantly need you and are touching you. Yeah. So he says it's repeating
test
too.
This now. Is it working any better? I just messed around with it again. Is it a little clearer?
Yeah. I that sounds really good to me. I don't know. You're gonna have to keep talking.
I'll keep talking.
No,
Yeah,
for
I don't
sure.
know. I'm messing around with my very limited tech skills. And so
No,
if
it
it
sounds
sounds
great.
a little better, okay, great. I messed around with it a little bit more, so hopefully it's honed. And you guys would hope that with instruments that cost $1 zillion and $1 to get, that it would be a little cheaper, I guess, or a little bit more simple when it
I
comes to
know.
these things.
No, I think you figured it out. I didn't have any moments where I was sort of waiting for the audio to catch up because it just decided to repeat itself all of a sudden. So that sounds great. I'm
Okay,
really
great.
excited to talk about the apologetics here with you. Yeah.
Not holy water in your computer. But
That's
Father,
so
what
funny.
happens if you bless the computer first
Mm.
and then you throw holy water onto it?
You'll have to tell us what happened. Hey,
No, I don't know. That
it's Marky
it still
Mark.
wouldn't. It probably wouldn't be a good idea. So
Hey, Marky Mark, it's good to see you. So anyway, okay, let's get started then on the pro-life apologetics. Where do you think we should start? Do you want to play devil's advocate, or do you want me to like start talking about the basics of how we approach how you should go into a conversation about pro-life apologetics or
that's a good
abortion?
question. I actually kind of think that what we should do is first do devil's advocate, and then
Okay.
we can do a couple questions like that. And then once you're done, you can go through with the audience the methodology that you use.
Sure. And if
So,
anyone has any specific, I can already tell you probably what cases people are going to want me to talk about. But if
mhm.
you want to give a question, or if there's something you want to hear more about, or how a rebuttal to, post it in the comments so we can see it and we can address it in real time. So feel free to do that. If there's anything you're like, I've never heard a really good rebuttal for this, let me know and I can see what I can do to address it. So let's hear it,
Okay, great.
Nicholas.
Yeah. So we have not practiced these.
We
These are
have not.
literally just going to be me. So I'm going to give you. I'll do this. I'll give you two questions that you hear on the street, and then I'm going to give you a hard one. At least in my opinion, one
Okay.
that's a little bit harder. So these
Okay.
ones, we'll see. Okay.
I'm going
She's
to
not
totally
seen
embarrass
these.
myself or something. Yeah.
First one is you're against abortion because it's white men who just want to control women's bodies. That they just have this knee-jerk reaction to want to control people. They've lost everything else that they've had. They just need to get out of the way and let women do what they want to do.
So I think what I would do, and this is, I guess I have to explain this, is that when you hear these sort of arguments, so to speak, it's not really an argument. It's a non sequitur. It's like a red herring. It doesn't follow that just because you're a man, for example, that you can't have an opinion. So what I would do in that instance is I would ask a lot of clarifying questions. So I would want to get to know exactly the root and core of what they are trying to say and clean it up for them a little bit. So I might say, so it sounds to me like you don't think men should be able to have an opinion on abortion. Am I understanding you correctly? And that way you can sort of reframe the question, because the way that you worded it is very typical and it's very, very messy. And so I want to make sure that I'm addressing your exact point. And so you'll probably
Mhm.
say, yeah, I think men shouldn't be able to have an opinion because they don't have a uterus. And I think at that point I would say,
No womb, no opinion.
yeah, no uterus, no opinion. Get your rosaries off my ovaries. Um, and so to that I
Yeah.
would say, is there any other moral issue that we exclude groups of people from having an opinion on simply because of their gender? Because I don't think that that's fair. Like, men are also involved in the process of reproduction. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes two to tango, as I've always said.
And some people might not be okay with that answer. And I think in that point, I would just redirect the conversation and say, to me, the conversation really rests on whether or not it's a human being. And so
Mm-hmm.
gender doesn't really matter, because this is a moral issue that rests on whether or not we are killing an innocent human being or not. And so I think that is a more valuable conversation. And I might just say that outright to somebody. Like, I don't think it makes sense to me that just because somebody is a man, they're not allowed to have an opinion, because let's be honest, you're okay with men having an opinion on abortion as long as they support your opinion. And that's just not always the case. So that's what I would do. Is I would either sort of address that this is a moral issue, and gender doesn't matter when we're talking about morality. And if they won't accept that, I would point out their hypocrisy and also say, and redirect the conversation back to what the core of the abortion issue is, which really is whether or not it's a human being deserving of human rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's fair. I would agree with that. I think that what you have to do when it comes to all of these questions is you first have to recognize that you can't assume that what the abortion advocate is saying when it comes to certain words like right or life or things like that are going to be the same thing. Because it's kind of like this. Here's a good question that I hear all the time whenever it comes to this debate. They'll say, or a statement rather. They'll say, well, I have a right to abortion, or the Constitution gave me a right to abortion. Well, a lot of people, they don't really dig down into what that means. My question is, well, who gave you the right? Right? Who gave you the right? If you say, well, the Constitution or the government gave me the right, I'd say, well, the government just took it away from you. So there you go. Just live by that then. But that's not going to satisfy them. And I'll understand why that's not satisfying to them. My question is therefore, what is a right? Where do rights come from? A right can't just come from the government, because that can just change at any moment, right? At any moment, at any time, the government can change its mind on an opinion.
Yeah, and
But
I think a lot of people use slavery as an example, right? Like we've had legalized things that were absolutely horrible, or lobotomies, for example. It's like there are all these things that have been legal. The use of thalidomide to treat morning sickness, and then children were ending up totally disabled, and that was accepted. And we would never allow that now. That would be a huge travesty. I think everyone would recognize that.
Yeah, because it's like this. I saw the Babylon Bee. They posted a funny skit the other day where they were basically this looks like a 14-year-old girl. She comes into the store. Did you see that? Yeah, I put it up on Instagram. I thought it was pretty funny. It was this girl who comes into a store and she's like, I'm gonna butcher all the details, but she's
I
like,
want to get a
can I get a
tattoo.
tattoo?
Yeah.
And the guy's like, you're not 18 yet, you can't get one. And then she kind of goes down this litany of things that she has to wait to either buy or do. Like, oh, can I, can I drive a car yet? No. Can I vote? No. Can I own a firearm? No, you can't. You have to have
Can I
training,
get a
all these
drink?
types of
Can I
things.
get some cigarettes at least?
Yeah. Can I do all these things? And he keeps saying no. And then finally he asks, or excuse me, she asks, well, can I perform can I have a gender surgery performed on me that's going to like radically alter the rest of my life? And the guy just pulls out a saw and he's like, let's go. It's just like, he goes insane. But we hear this term all the time, trans rights are human rights, gay rights are human rights, or abortion rights are human rights, or it's healthcare. Well, what does a right mean? According to the Catholic Church, a right is only going to be something in which God gives you to do a good action or to do a good deed, a deed of virtue through. So an example of this would be, for instance, when we say, I have a right to X, the question should be, is that whatever the X is, right? Is it moral, justified, holy, right? Or going to be able you to pursue God in some way? So like if someone says, yes, sir, third order. If someone is just going to assert, here's a more controversial one. I have a right to religious liberty. Oh, okay. Well, here's my question. Well, who gives you the right to what? You only have the right to worship the one God. Now, you may have the ability because of free will to choose what you want to worship, but you only have the right to do that which is right. So in the context of abortion, we can say you only have the right to do that which is morally right and morally standing, if you will. And so to me, when people make that argument, it just doesn't work and it falls flat. And so I think you have to go back to questions like that, but especially the one you brought up, like when does human life begin? What is human life, etc.
Yeah, and there's some really great tactics. You hear people, I think a lot of pro-lifers have really gotten good at this, about trotting out the toddler is what it's called. And so what often pro-lifers will do in conversation is they'll say, okay, so if you think that abortion should be illegal in cases of poverty, what if I have a toddler and I'm in poverty and I would save money by just killing my toddler? Would that be acceptable? Basically, you wouldn't say it probably in that exact phraseology, but that's the root of the rebuttal. And of course, everybody would recoil at that, because of course we don't kill people to solve poverty, right? But we do in the case of abortion. That's one of the reasons people will argue for abortion, day and night. And I do want to say, John, your comment here says the best apologetic argument is to demonstrate fetal development and how early the heartbeat begins. I actually have to disagree with you. A lot of anti-abortion activists understand that they understand human development. Not all of them. A good portion of them don't understand fetal development, but a fair amount do, and they still believe. I mean, David Boonin, for example, the philosopher David Boonin, he is notorious for agreeing that this is a biological human being from the moment of conception, but it doesn't have human rights. It is not a human person. And so then it becomes this philosophical question of what is personhood, what makes us human. And so I think I would love for it to be that simple. It would be lovely. But unfortunately, we live in a dualistic age in which people have really separated our material being from our spiritual being. And so that you see with the transgenderism, that's why these issues really, they all intersect: transgenderism, homosexuality, abortion, contraception, because they're all rooted in sterilizing the sexual act and having license to do whatever you want with your body, even if it hurts other people or yourself for that matter. And it really stems from a misunderstanding of the dignity of the human person, and what we were ordered towards. And again, that's more of a philosophical question. We can see it in the natural law, but that philosophical question of who am I, what am I made for, that's really, really important. And so I have talked to people who will agree it is a biological human, but it's not a person because it doesn't have things like sentience or, all of these different qualifiers that people argue makes us human. What do you think about that, Nicholas?
Yeah, no, I think that's all right, because I mean, the thing is that we sometimes take for granted, like, oh yeah, everyone knows what a human is. But do we really know that? Like, I like Hounds of Justice's comment, we need to get back to scholastic disputation. 100% fully agree, and stick around because I actually have a very scholastic question at the end of this conversation. But no, it's a good question, because it's like we have to really understand what is a human, and then proceed from there. If we're going to disagree on what is a human, then it's just going to all fall apart. So we have to find some type of footing. We can't just assume that because we're in America that, everyone kind of is on a similar page. I mean, one of the things that the normie right has to understand that they just do not understand yet is that we are in a situation in which, like, we're not just in a post-Christian nation, right? And we have to first accept that, like, okay, we are in a post-Christian nation, but then we have to recognize that we're fundamentally turning into a very anti-Christian nation in the context of maybe not large swaths of, the population in the Midwest or the Deep South or something like that, but I'm talking about like institutionally.
Yeah.
So our media, our sports entertainment, our education system, our justice departments, that they are all, our music, our entertainment, as
all the things that are really formative, like those things are, they form culture. They are making culture, and they document culture. And that's, it's really interesting, the intersection too with the sexual revolution, the Second Vatican Council. I mean, I'm not somebody that like points at the Second Vatican Council and is like, that is the thing. I think it was symptomatic of a larger cultural shift because it coalesces with the sexual revolution. So there was something going on there. And with it, you see like the modernist churches that are really ugly and stripped away of all the glory. And you see it in artwork, the abstract art or the non-art art. It's like, what is this? This is, you're right. It's not just a post-Christian world. It is an anti-Christian world, because Christianity exudes and embodies truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you think about it, we can transport all of the issues that we've talked about, whether it be homosexuality, abortion, contraception, etc. But we can also say, well, what about in the Catholic context? We can understand that while all those issues are trying to snuff out life, what about female quote unquote priesthood? Because when Christ says, this is my body, and he comes to earth incarnate in the body of a physical male, and he has his bride, it's to produce that beautiful, if you will, pictorial image of marriage, right, between Christ and the church, right? Ephesians chapter 5, St. Paul uses that as an illustration, says this is a great sacrament, talking about holy matrimony. Well, if women can now be priests, then what happens, whenever you now have, a female priest saying to the church, which is in a certain sense mystically female, this is my body given up for you, right? It's like turning the church into a lesbian mentality, which is going to be very, very deadly. And this is why, the advocates of death do want to push this, right? It's all about snuffing out that which is life. And so, yeah, it's very, very troubling.
It is about this androgynous understanding of the human person too, right? Like, and it's really interesting that we have seen this push for androgyny and this elimination of sexual difference, because sexual difference is what brings life. And you see it within the life of the church, even the church itself. People don't really understand that the church building in its physical manifestation even represents a womb. You go into Mass, Christ is conceived on the altar, and you receive him, and you are to go out and be like Christ to the world. It's like you're exiting the womb of the church. The nave, which is navel, your navel is what connects you to your mother. I mean, these things are all related etymologic. When it comes to etymology, you just look in how it's written within the church, and people don't understand, like, that's really beautiful. That, like, our priest truly is married to the church, not married to a building, but what that building is a manifestation of. And he is in persona Christi. And so you have all of these layers and levels. And so that's why it's really important that women are not priests, that there is sexual difference, because the church literally, it just exudes, it is a part of its nature for it to be that way. It can't be another way. Just like marriage can't be another way. Marriage has to be between a man and a woman.
Yeah, no, fully agree. You ready for my
oh yeah,
do we want to answer this question?
Devil's advocate. Embryos split into twins after conception. So how can an embryo count as a person? Related, with all the miscarriages, how can God care about the preborn? Okay, so yeah, two good questions. The embryo split into twins. So I'm a twin, actually. I'm not identical. So there were two eggs that were fertilized in my case. But how can an embryo count as a person? So I think then it comes back to the nature of man. The essence of the embryo, I would argue, right? There's nothing essentially different about the embryo in terms of its nature than a fetus or a born infant or a toddler, because you have everything there. It is self-developing from within. It has all of the components it needs within itself to be like to have arms and legs and stuff. You just have to let it grow. And so it is the same organism. Like what I would probably say in this situation, and this is my favorite argument for abortion. This is what I use when I'm starting off a conversation with somebody, because I think it sets the tone for the rest of the conversation. And it's a great gateway to open up the conversation about human rights and everything like that. So what I usually use is called the 10-second apologist. And it's something that I learned when I was working with Justice for All, and also used it again with Equal Rights Institute. But it goes like this. If the unborn is growing, then it must be alive. And if it has two living parents or two human parents, then it must be human. So if it's living and growing with two human parents, then it must be human. So why does it not get human rights like you and I? So it's this syllogism where you talk about, we know that living things grow, right? That's part of how we know something is alive. The law of biogenesis means that you can't conceive an organism that is different than your own species, right? Like a dolphin can't be pregnant with a dog. I can never get pregnant with an elephant, thank God. But all of these things, it's like, you just can't, it's not physically possible to conceive something that's apart from your own species. It's not how we're created. We're created to procreate and generate offspring of our own kind. And so highlighting those two things and then saying, so what is it about that offspring that's different than from us? Like, why do I get human rights? Because all of us are really different, right, Nicholas? Like, I will point out to the person I'm talking to, some people are really tall. Some people are really short. Some people are genuinely hilarious, and other people, it's hard to like them very much. It's like some people are really, they have a different capacity of intelligence. There are all of these different qualities that we possess that are different and make us unique, but there's something about all of us that gives us equal human rights. And so what is that thing? And so being able to drill down that philosophical question of like, we've already dealt with the biology, it's human. It just couldn't be anything else. And so let's shift this to the philosophical argument of what makes us human and ask them to articulate what gives us our humanness. Because even if they're not ready to talk about ontology and God and divine law, you can at least say on a secular level, even secularists, modernists, pagans, everyone will acknowledge that you and I have equal rights. And so that's probably how I would answer or start that question, because it doesn't matter if the embryos split into twins after conception, they're still human. Like, it doesn't change whether or not they're human. And then same with miscarriages. I've experienced miscarriage, and what I would say to that is, there are a lot of, I've also had a sister die in a car accident. And so I think what I would say is we recognize that tragedy it hurts so much because we know it is not properly ordered. And that has to do with the fall of the fallen nature that we have. And that has nothing to do about God. God permits these things for our sanctification. I'm certain of that. But he doesn't actively will it. And that's where you get to have a conversation about God's active will and his passive will, because those are different things. But they have to accept that there is perhaps a God and that he might have these attributes of a passive will and an active will where they are differentiated. So that's a whole nother conversation. But that's how I would approach that one. So thank you, Father John Brown. That was great.
Yeah, that's a good question. Here's my, I was going to save this one to the end, but actually the questions about like, what is man, like properly order this next question. You feel preg after a big meal. Don't we all, my friend?
You can tell we're not in Lent anymore.
We are not in Lent anymore. No, not at all. So here's a question. So this one, I'm gonna try to break it down for the audience as well, because it's kind of a complex question. But this was a real question in the Scholastic period, and even going back beforehand. We touched a little bit upon this.
This might be out of my depth. Yeah, Okay.
We'll see what happens. Okay, so we all in modern times take for granted, and let me first and foremost say this. So what I'm about to say, I still think is a disputed question, minus the abortion part of it. I want to make that a huge clarifier, what I'm about to say. Okay.
Yeah, because people are going to clip this and be like, Nicholas Cavazos is not a real Catholic.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm sure I'll get Brother Peter Diamond to do an expose on me or something.
Oh, please.
Still waiting for that day. So here's a good question, Father John Brown. You're welcome, and you might actually like this question. I don't know if you're really just a lover of medieval scholasticism, but you might like this question. So, in the medieval days, there was a dispute about when, essentially, when is a soul, like when is an embryo truly a human? And this was the reasoning. So today we kind of just take for granted the belief that when we say life begins at conception, right? The scholastics would agree with that, right? Life begins with conception. But we would have to ask the question, well, what kind of life? And before you just say, well, it's obvious it's a human life. Quickening. Yeah, you're getting to this idea. We would have, the scholastics aren't just necessarily going to be like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. No, they're not going to say that. And this is the reason why. So all living things have a soul, right? All things that are living. So I have a soul. Miss Angela has a soul. You viewers have a soul. Your cats and dogs have souls. Your pet fish have souls. And all of the trees and grass have soul. Now, those souls aren't going to be the same things, right? There's no such thing as a world soul. So like all of us are one soul somehow together. Aquinas debunks that idea that was kind of floating around at his time. But we all have, and we all don't have the same level of important type of soul, right? So it's like my value is greater than my dog or my cat. It's
I don't
definitely
know. I've
greater
had
than.
people argue otherwise.
Yeah, I don't know. You'll see that. It's definitely greater than
Mac,
a pet fish or
I
something.
love you.
My shoes have soles. Yes,
I also
but
hear
it's
gingers
not
have
living.
souls. I don't know if
I
anyone
don't know about that one. I think the question on gingers having souls, that's a disputed question still. But so all things that are living have souls. Now, here's the thing. To be living, you have to have a soul. Again, a soul is just the life force of a body. And so here's the question that we really fall into. We have to ask the question, okay, so all things that are living have souls, but what kind of soul is it? So we can clearly say that a tree or grass have a vegetative soul. A vegetative soul, according to Aristotle and the Scholastics, is just going to be something that is living, but that is not in movement, right? So
Right.
we can agree, yeah, sure, the grass, like it's moving in the wind, but it's not actually moving, right? It's an exterior force moving it. It's immobile. It's hanging out, if you will, right? It's not moving in and of itself. It doesn't have the capacity in and of itself to just move about freely without any type of, external force hitting it, if you will. And so we would say that is just a vegetative soul. But when we look at, our cats and dogs or any other type of animal, we can see that they are in movement, right? They're in movement by themselves, right? And we can see that they have instinct, right?
They have true
That kicks in.
animation, right?
Yeah, the
Like I
true
think,
animation.
yeah.
And so Aquinas and the Scholastics will call that the animalistic or the sensitive soul. Now, what makes us separate from the animals is not going to just be, the way our body is structured ultimately, but a human being is going to be a body and soul composite. A body, which is physical or corporeal, either term you can use, and a non-corporeal, a non-physical soul. But our soul is going to be different than the previous two because we have a rational soul, meaning the ability to contemplate, to think, and the ability to choose, right? Intellect and will. That's what it means to be in the image and likeness of God. When you read in Genesis, right, let us create man in our image, he's not saying let us create all man 6'4" with 5 fingers on each hand, right, in a body. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about intellect and will. Now, all of that groundwork being laid and being said, they're going to say, and Aquinas accepts this, that when we
Can
look
I
at a
just say this is
fertilized,
not a 101 course on that you are getting a master class.
you're getting a master class.
No.
You're just getting Nick. This is the thoughts that I think at 3 a.m. when
Nicholas's
I'm just sitting like
musings.
I don't know what to do.
We should just
Nick's musings.
rename the show Nicholas's musings.
Oh, I don't know. I think if I was to make a show like that, it'd just be me ranting for an hour. But so it's better that you're balancing it out. But so with the scholastics are going to say that okay, an embryo that's fertilized, right? It's alive. Clearly, it's alive, but we don't. It's not moving, right? And you'll say, well, they didn't have a microscope, so how do they know if it's not moving? Well, they're not the reports from women, right? They're not feeling any movement, right?
Yeah,
They're
but
not
like what
feeling any
about the
movement.
multiplication of the cells happening every second?
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that because I have some arguments that
Okay.
actually I've gone into that I wrestle back and forth with. So they're gonna say, okay, well, it's not moving, but then they'll say, okay, in a period of about 40 to 80 days, then the vegetative soul will transform, if you will, into a sensitive soul because about what is 40 days in week time? Do you know?
40 days?
Yeah.
Well,
It's just 6 weeks. It's just
yeah.
6 weeks. Yeah. It's 6 weeks. And what do we see from reports is that women say it's generally around 6 weeks. There is even some slight movement, right? And that's when you do start to see the embryo, right, start to move about in a more visible sense. And this we can tell, right, with modern technology.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll say, okay, so it's now in mobility, it's not immobile. And so now it has a sensitive soul. But eventually, right, when the human body starts to really form and the matter becomes fitting, then God infuses into it a fully rational soul, right?
So
A
can
soul
you
that has
talk
the
about
ability to
this
think.
need for fittingness? Because in my mind, and when we talked
Uh-huh.
about it last time, that was kind of the thing I was hung up on because in my mind, something has a nature and that's immutable. It doesn't gradually change over time. Like your nature is your essence in one way. And I don't know if maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but that's how I've always understood this concept of having a nature. It's immutable. It is constant. It is not something that gradually changes. And it's the way you are describing this sort of acquisition of these different levels, so to speak, of soul. It sort of feels as if maybe my understanding is not correct in terms of like a Thomistic understanding of what the human person is.
Yeah, so I think that your presupposition in it, and this is maybe a good place where I can throw in where the abortionist will use this argument, is that I would say I fully agree with you, but the presupposition is that the vegetative and sensitive soul is a human. So they'll say that it's not a human because what makes a human is a rational soul. So they'll agree with you. They'll say, yes, you're correct. Right. It's body and a rational soul, not a body and just a immobile soul or an animalistic soul or a sensitive soul. And so they'll agree with you. They'll say absolutely. And when we say fitting matter, there's a lot of ways we can define it. In this context, it's just going to be that the rational soul, because it is made in the image and likeness of God, that it has to have, when it is created, right? It's created in an instant by God, and it's infused into the body, and that the body has to be of the nature, if you will, of man in a much more fully formed sense. Now, where the abortionists will come in and they'll say, well, there were different, not so much theologians, but philosophers, mainly secular philosophers, who would say, well, in that 6-week time period, right, or even longer, right, from the moment of conception up until whenever it becomes a rational soul, it's not a human. Right? It's not a human. And so therefore, can we not have an abortion? Right? Now, the church has always said, and popes have written on this subject before. Hundreds of theologians have written on this before.
Didache from the beginning. I mean, it was just from the beginning of the church.
Yeah, right from the beginning, they're going to say, well, no, even if, even in this case, right, you can't commit an abortion. But let me just throw the question at you in that context. It's just like, okay, well, we do see, right, that science has said, right, it's around 6 weeks, right? Logically, it makes sense because if the embryo is, right, not in movement by itself, and then it can't be a rational soul. It can't even be a sensitive soul, but it is alive, so it has to be vegetative. Then why can't we in that time period?
Well, then I would probably counter that. And again, this is where I feel like from the philosophical perspective, I am not equally yoked with you. I just think you are so much smarter than I am. But what I would say is, what do you say then about like an adult born human being that is in a vegetative state, and you don't know they don't have any brain activity. You don't know if they're ever going to come out of a coma or whatever it is. Should we be able to kill them?
Yeah, so I would say no, but even if I was to play advocate,
would you say that because the other thing too is like somebody might say, well, it's because they've had a rational soul at some point. Is that would you argue that?
Yeah, I'd say, well, I wouldn't even say just they had it at one point. I just said if they have it. So it's like when we say rational soul,
is it just a capacity for that?
Yeah, it's the capacity, what it is in its essence. So it's like, okay, you're a human, but you're in a vegetative state, if you will. Okay, well, this is what's going to happen. I am going to say, you are a human, right? But you had the potentiality for movement. And if it wasn't for this defect, you could still move. That's very different than saying an embryo that is not moving, but is alive, incapable of movement is.
My underlying premise with that too is that it's not possible for a human being to have a vegetative soul. Like I in my mind, that embryo has the capacity, if it's left to its proper development, to have a rational soul. And so the reason I think I have such a hard time with this question, that my brain sort of like went kaput the last time we talked about it, like brain dead, because I just had never even heard this argument. And I've had thousands of conversations about abortion. And this isn't one that I've ever encountered. And I think it's because most people who are pro-choice are not steeped in this understanding of what makes a human a human. Thank you for coming on here tonight. It was so great to have you. I think in my mind, it's not possible for a human being to have something other than a rational soul, because that is a part of, again, like in my mind, the nature of a human being naturally has the propensity and capacity for a rational soul. And now, will every person have a rational capacity though? Like, not every person does. I mean, they have a capacity for it, but they don't exhibit that. They never acquire real rationality. I don't know. This is a really good question.
Yeah, because again, what I would respond to that is I'd just say again, you keep going back to this idea of that, I can't understand a man outside of the rational soul, and I'd say I agree with you. That's
I
why they're
agree
going to
with
say
you.
it's not a human because it doesn't have a rational soul yet. So here's how I would kind of look at the question, because it's like, I mean, just again, me playing advocate to look at some of the responses from the audience. So it's like we can use the conversation of, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Well, I could still throw right back and just say, well, yes, I agree, but like God knows all things, but does that rule out that there is a vegetative soul and then a sensitive soul and
Well,
then a rational soul? That's a presupposition that it would, like, that would rule it out, because it does nowhere it says like, yeah, before you were formed in the womb, I knew you. Yeah, God knows all things, but he in that could it doesn't say that he wouldn't know that you would be vegetative and then really assume you once you became a rational soul,
what is really interesting too is that other religions, for example, Judaism, they have different ideas on when the soul comes into the body as well. I don't think Jews unilaterally believe that that humans are human from conception. I don't think that they all believe that they have a soul from conception. And so I think there are, perhaps, if I'm not mistaken, within Islam and Judaism, different sects that believe that abortion is okay up to a certain point. It's been a while since I've like read up on that, but I do remember talking to people on college campuses saying as much from their own background.
Yeah.
And that stems too from like this notion of the quickening and stuff, which actually is a terrible. Most of my kids actually, so I've given birth to 5 children, and I had 1 miscarriage in the mix there, but all of my children, the placenta has been anterior, which means it's on the front. So I don't usually feel my children move until way later into pregnancy. And I think, I mean, months sometimes later than like most women would. And so like my quickening would have been months later than most women. Just
It's
because.
funny. The Scholastics, in a way, kind of have an answer to that too,
Do they?
because they'll say, and I mean, I don't think that this is a unilateral response, but I could whip up an easy example, being like, they would say, well, the male is going to really be felt around 40 to 80 days, where a female is going to be really felt around 90 plus days, 90 to 120 days. And so it's just like, what happens there. You want to know how I would respond to this whole question, though? This
Yeah,
whole
please.
overarching question?
I'm stuck a little bit just because my mind can't comprehend the idea of human beings acquiring different levels of soul, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's
And
a bad
again,
way to describe it, but
maybe the way you could rephrase it to help your brain is it's the embryo having different levels of souls until it fully assumes the
right.
human nature. You know what I'm
I know.
saying?
Yeah, but
Which is, I know
like
it's hard to think of.
I can't do it. My brain,
I'm just
my
trying
little
to.
tiny brain can't do it.
No, you can do it. So here's how I would respond. So this is a question that is hard, and the reason it's hard is because, first and foremost, I am a strict Thomist, and while a lot of Thomists of like the 19th and 20th century started to abandon Aquinas on this last point, this point that we're talking about now, and the reason that they would typically give is, science. My response to that would be, well, to be fair, it's like, can we put the soul under a microscope? No, I don't know if I fully think that that's a good answer. I think maybe what it really is it's kind of PR wise, it does look kind of like you can justify abortion. Because when you also continue to read the whole body of first off, when you read the body of Aristotle's work, he's not going to have a problem in certain contexts with abortion. So it's just like, okay, that we're on some icy
And I
ground
want to
there.
clarify for anyone who's just jumped on, you are not arguing in favor of this position. You
Yes.
are just explaining it. You are not at all pro-abortion. Please do not misconstrue what Mr. Cavazos is saying here. He's just explaining the philosophy behind this idea. He's not.
Yes.
Okay. He has said that it is disputed in his mind, but
yeah,
I just want to clarify
110%
that.
pro-life. 110%
Yeah.
pro-life.
Okay. Before anyone gets mad at you and says
Yeah,
that the
before I get
people on the meaning of
canceled.
Catholic are pro-abortion, we're not at all.
Yeah, not at all. No, I'm just throwing out this idea because it's a good question to wrestle with to sharpen our apologetics.
Mhm.
And therefore, it's like how I would deal with this is it's like, okay, well, I think that on the one hand, where the strength of this argument does lie is that when you really start to understand Aristotelian Thomistic understanding of the soul, it makes sense because it's like, yes, if a thing is alive, it has a soul because a soul is just the life force of whatever that thing is, right? So, okay, an embryo that's alive, that's fertilized, okay, yes, I will agree that it's alive. But to be fair, it's just like, if it's not moving, then it comes down to, well, I mean, can we really say it's a sensitive soul? Can we really say it's a rational soul? Like, that's kind of hard because in our nature, it is the ability of movement to be mobile.
Mm-hmm.
But how I would respond to this is I'd say, well, where the weak part of the argument starts to come in my mind is when we start to apply certain methods of modern science to this. Because, and I've started to talk to different really well-known pro-life speakers about this. One of the things that you kind of hinted at was, okay, even whenever the embryo is fertilized, how much movement, like microscopic movement, is going on, right? Microscopic.
Well, it's replicating on cells. Like, it's incredible how fast they grow and develop. I mean, it is absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Exactly. So we do see that. Now, maybe where I could throw back at that is I could say, well, to be fair, can't you say that that's true with a plant too? Is that once a plant seed is like microscopically, all different cells are going here, there, and everywhere. So it's like we could kind of go back and forth. But where I think that this argument really starts to boil down is that when we really start to look at up close the amount of movement that even just the whole, if you will, the embryo is starting to do, right? And again, we really need modern science for this. Then there starts to be this argument where I'm like, okay, well, this is in movement, so it can't just be vegetative, right? It can't just be vegetative. Or maybe in the context of humans, it's a bit different. And the reason we know it could be a bit different is because even with vegetative souls, we do see anomalies. And a good anomaly would be, for instance, the fly catching plants, right?
Yeah.
They're in a certain movement that's not like an oak tree or a pine tree or anything else, right? So there's kind of this anomaly. Well, what's more of an anomaly when it comes to the animal kingdom? Well, it would definitely be us because it's like on the one hand, while we are rational animals, we are also rational beings, right? And so we are going to be somewhat of an anomaly.
Right.
And so I think that there can be certain arguments that we make for this. Now, Thomistically, how I would respond to this, and this is how Aquinas would respond to this, is he would say, you should never kill an embryo through abortion because it still has the potentiality to be a human, right? Which is a fair argument, right? So he was never advocating abortion or thought it was good or anything. He was just very much so saying, if it's in potentiality or it's in the process of materially being a human, and then it can be, formally a human later on. So I think that those arguments work. And I think it's important to just talk about this overall question because it is complex, but I think it's the strongest argument that generally people who are non-Catholic, non-pro-life, but who know our argument could throw back, and they could say, well, what about this thing with the soul? Don't you think? Like, it's a fair argument.
Yeah.
I think.
No, I mean, it is thought-provoking. And when I was in college, and so my background is in mass communications advertising, and my minor was communication studies with this emphasis on rhetoric and argumentation. And I remember taking a class on public speaking, and we had to choose one controversial topic to present on for the entire semester. And so naturally I chose abortion. And it was really interesting because in the course of that class, I had to read up on pro-abortion philosophy and whatever their arguments were. And I actually had to give a presentation arguing in favor of the side that I opposed. And so I had to give a presentation as if I were pro-abortion to prove that I really understood the ins and outs of their arguments. And I remember the whole class would give you feedback and you would receive all of that. And I had many people comment, I honestly thought maybe you were pro-choice. Like, because the thing that I think is really important and people forget in terms of learning apologetics, it is so important to know your opponent, know your enemy. That is like the number one thing you have to understand about spiritual warfare. And this is a spiritual battle. Know your enemy. And I think it is extremely helpful to, one, help you relate to them and anticipate their perspective. It can allow you to sympathize or even empathize with their position. But also it gives you clarity of mind so you can even steel man their arguments. If you know what the argument is. And so I think we do have to wrestle with these things so that we can be better apologists. We should be doing it not just with pro-life apologetics, but even with our faith. I know you sort of talked about at the beginning how becoming a Thomist and learning philosophy really helped refine your apologetics for pro-life stuff and other things. I actually did the exact opposite. I refined my pro-life apologetics and learned how to argue and understand logic. And that helped me in my Catholic faith and my apologetics with my faith. And so there's just no way, you can't go wrong. Just learn how to argue and be persuasive. And so the last thing I want to end on before we sort of end the stream for the night is I want to give you guys just a few tips when you do engage in conversation with people about abortion. My first thing is I wouldn't recommend doing it online. I think for obvious reasons, but we love to do it. I do it sometimes too. But if you're really wanting to have a conversation with someone about abortion, go get coffee, go hang out, have a meal, make it relational.
Have a beer, just not Bud Light.
Have a beer, yeah, just not Bud Light. Have an old fashioned, which mine is gone. But I think that's the first thing is just be human. Don't be a jerk. And also remember that the person you're talking to is also human and they have their own background, their own experiences, their own brokenness, just like we all do. And have that at the fore. Try your best to see Christ in that person. And that's not always easy. I've had some really weird experiences on college campuses. One guy looked like, what is that guy from Thor's brother, Loki?
Oh, Loki or something?
Dude, it was crazy. He was wearing a huge black trench coat, the long black hair, blue eyes, and got crazy. It was wild.
Marvel. I have some spicy takes on Marvel, not gonna lie.
But I so that's the first thing. Just remember they're human the best that you can. Second, if you're on a college campus or you're in public and you're discussing this, remember that you're not always trying to convince necessarily the person in front of you. You might be trying to persuade the people listening. And that's something I have found often. That's why it's also really important to maintain your own composure, because there have been many times when I've been in a conversation on campus and I knew I wasn't necessarily going to persuade the person in front of me. I mean, you sort of get to a point in the conversation, you see it's not going anywhere, but you might even continue to engage simply because, people are listening and it's making them think. There's a reason they're still there listening. And so I think that's really important. But also the last couple of things are just very practical. Ask clarifying questions, define words, define language, find common ground as much as you can. If somebody brings up the case of rape or something, don't be an animal and just say, well, that's only less than 1% of all cases of abortion. That's just not helpful for persuading them, even if it's true. You might be able to get that at some point after you've built some sort of a rapport with the person. But I have never once found that to be an effective strategy for getting someone to actually listen to what you have to say on that question, for example. So find common ground with them and say, I understand rape is horrible. I personally know people who have been assaulted or raped, and it's horrible. And I think men are not prosecuted enough and aren't held accountable, you're right, we have to do something about that.
Yeah,
You know,
we can't take our society seriously if we're allowing people with multiple felons out on bail or off
oh
the
my
hook as
goodness.
misdemeanors, but then right around turn and be like, uh, men need to learn to stop raping people. Dads, teach your sons that. You're just like, what?
Yeah.
Yes, I agree, but thankfully,
Then
most dads
and
don't
then
have to
you're
sit
like,
down
this
and
is a
have that
great time for me to
conversation.
talk about why we need the death penalty. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, for real. Like,
For real
I,
though.
yeah, I'm just like, I don't understand, but you're absolutely right. I mean, you want to empathize with someone. I think
Find
it's always just
common ground.
yeah, I think it's
It's
just like,
relational.
it's like time and place. Cause it's like, I've heard forever this debate more in the context of how you evangelize. Like, okay, do you need to be the guy who's out there, you know, preaching with the bullhorn, or do you need to be the person sitting across the table, right, and having a one-on-one conversation? And I think it just depends on the moment when it's necessary. Use your judgment and your prudence when it comes to it. You know.
Yeah. And I just hope that anyone who's watching this now or watching this later spend some time praying for Art and his late wife. This just sounds so awful, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what your wife went through. That is so tragic. And,
Yeah, it's very sad.
I think a lot of us have been impacted by abortion. And I think that's why it's important to just remember how many of us have been impacted by abortion in one way or another. I don't think I know anyone who hasn't been touched in some way by abortion. And we would do well to remember that when we're trying to persuade people why abortion is wrong, because so many
Mm-hmm.
are trying to understand, come to terms with, justify. We all do it with our own sin. We all try to justify our own sin.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us, most of us do. And so I think we have to have compassion on that woundedness. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there are real monsters out there that don't have any remorse whatsoever. And often I've been asked this question. I think this would be a good chance or a good time to talk about this. It's just that, people ask whether or not I think women who procure abortions should be prosecuted and thrown in jail. I get that
Mm-hmm.
one a lot. And I don't have a solid, yeah, absolutely answer yet. I think in time that could be appropriate, but for the time being, most women, a very high percentage of those women, are coerced into having abortions. And you can't, I don't know how you would separate those women from the women who are just deliberately being evil human beings and Satanists
Mm-hmm.
and having abortions, right? Most of these
Mm-hmm.
women are being coerced by their boyfriends, by their dads, by their husbands, to have abortions, or because of whatever their circumstances are, they genuinely feel they have no other option. I don't know many women who have received or had an abortion and felt it was really empowering. I know women
Mm-hmm.
pretend to say that. They don't mean it. No one goes to their abortion appointment joyfully. I've sidewalk counseled. I'm on the board of a sidewalk counseling organization. I will tell you, those women look ashamed. They look sad. They look worn out. They look like they're just barely hanging on. This is not a joyful event for them. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that we should always assume the worst in their character because they're in such a broken place. A woman is not choosing abortion because she's sound, of
Yeah.
sound mind. And so I'm not saying that there would never be a place for that, for prosecuting women who are choosing abortion. I think if we continue to build a culture of life where it really is unthinkable, and she's being a really evil human being, then yeah, absolutely, that totally makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. Abortionists should be the one. They're serial killers, and they should be the ones prosecuted and thrown in jail for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, no, fully
So
agree. It's one of those things where it's like, I think where the pro-life movement needs to redirect its focus and its aim. And maybe we can even talk about this on our next talk on abortion that we'll have next time. But just like, one of the things about like building a pro-life culture is we have to look at not just the political aspects of is abortion going to be legal or not in a state, but rather say, okay, even in the states say that it's not legal, right? So for instance, you and I, right, we're on opposite ends of the country, right? You're in Minnesota, I'm in Texas. Very
Yeah.
different cultures, right? You
Yeah.
post often, and I see on the news often, right, just the insanities of what's going on in your
I
legislature.
hate this place so much right
Yeah,
now. I
it's
can't
absolutely insane.
even.
But then, like for instance, my legislature, right? It's banned, and you'll receive, I think it's like 10 years in jail for like the doctor, $200,000 fine. Like it's
They
completely banned.
prosecute anyone who aids and abets or commits the abortion. They do not prosecute the women. That has been also one of those talking points that has been such a lie by the left. Women
Mhm.
are not being prosecuted for abortions. They are disincentivizing abortionists from committing abortions. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's just leftists use they'll use these false premises, and
Mhm.
they will force everyone into these false premises where essentially everyone thinks, oh, okay, it has to be this way, or we'll be in trouble or something. And so it's just not normal. But if we're going to build a pro-life culture, we have to say, okay, even in states like mine, so it's like you look at most of the deep south, it's completely banned now in most of the deep south, which is not very surprising, right? It's a very conservative area when
You
it
got the
comes to
Bible Belt.
even
Yeah.
it's the Bible Belt. When it comes to even the transgender issue, a lot of southern states, Mississippi, Tennessee, uh, even just a little bit south of me in a small town, the local state legislature rep introduced earlier this year a bill banning transgender surgeries and hormone therapies, and it's gone all the way through. And it looks like it's going to pass this next week. Praise be to God, and it's going to get signed by the governor, right? So it's
Mhm.
just one extra state. But here's the thing: even though all that's good, a culture of life is not just about banning things. Culture of life also has to
Right.
be about promoting things. And so we need to start to hold our legislatures accountable and say, why aren't we making tax policies where it favors people having children and lots of children, right?
And
Tax
favors
benefits and tax
marriage.
breaks.
And favors
Yeah,
marriage.
favors
Like
marriage.
we have to stop the decline of marriage and religion in our culture. And if in doing those two things, you will create a culture of life. Um, I agree with you. There have to be different incentives in place. Right now, we do incentivize um, women being alone and single
Mm-hmm.
moms, and we perpetuate the cycle of fatherless homes, which keeps people in poverty. I mean, it's not rock. I mean, we just see this. The data is there. It's been there for a long time, and yet we continue to have this policy that tries to make the government the savior instead of embracing a truly Catholic understanding of what social justice is, which really comes down to subsidiarity and
Mm-hmm.
helping your home, like helping those in your community. We have to reclaim that in our Catholic culture if we want to
Mm-hmm.
make any progress.
Yeah, no, fully agree. So that's definitely worth a show topic for
Yeah,
sure,
that
just
is
like how
another
to do
one.
this.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about pro-life apologetics. I use the term anti-abortion normally because pro-life, the seamless garment, it just has so many connotations these days. So I like to be very
Mm-hmm.
specific. So if you
That's
see
fair,
me
yeah.
talk about myself as an anti-abortion activist, that is why. Nicholas, do you have anything going on or anything people should be coming over to your channel for right now? You should just go anyway and subscribe, by the way, people. If you're
Please
listening and you're not
subscribe.
subscribed to
Yes.
the Digital Thomist, there's a link in the description. So go over to his channel and subscribe.
Yeah, no, we have so we've had stuff in the works that have been planning for months, writing out scripts, doing some pre-filming and things like that. I've also been doing some interviews with another show for those of you guys who don't watch that you should just go and sub to. He's not paying me to do this, but just go and check out the Glad Trad podcast. I've been a longtime friend of Jordan Pacheco and Rudy Carlos over there, who are two great guys. And we just started a series that is going to be transferred over to my show fairly soon. But I just did an episode with them called Answering Anti-SSPX Objections, where I'm a little bit more fiery in that episode than I am in this one. But we go through it and answer it just part one, some of these like beginning questions about, are they schismatic? Are they excommunicated? Wasn't Lefebvre a heretic? What about their views on the new mass? Things along that nature. we're going to be doing a 50-plus part installment with several theologians on my show that's already in the works of recording and script making. That's going to be coming out fairly soon. Once I finish all my term papers, that's really the thing that's holding me back right now.
I always forget how young you are. You're just a little baby.
Yeah, I'm still pretty young. Yet very old inside. So we have that, and then we also are going to be having, again, been planning out for months, Catholics need to understand their faith in a systematic way, and so we have our series over traditional Catholic dogmatic theology, where I'm going to be going over some 1950s preconciliar seminary textbooks that for those probably few viewers of you, right, who are old enough to be listening, that would remember back in the day, man, you would have talked to a local parish priest back in the 40s, and it would have just, just been absolutely amazing. They were just being able to answer all these complex questions, like the ones I was throwing out tonight. And so being able to help the lay faithful really understand these types of things, I'm hoping to be good. And then final thing I'll promote is, this isn't in the works yet, but for the viewers to be praying for this, I have the opportunity to be recording for my own show a documentary this summer, where I'm going to be going to an undisclosed traditional monastery and be over the course of a good chunk of the summer reading through the whole of St. Thomas's Summa, but bringing the viewers along and giving short explanations for all the different articles as I'm reading them live, and making it maybe a good 2.5 hour, 3 hour long documentary about what it would have been like to have been a scholastic in a monastery in a medieval setting. And so, yeah, we'll see if that happens. That's still in the works. That's very much so to be determined. But yeah,
that's amazing.
What's going on.
And I also have a channel. I don't know if any of you are new and haven't subscribed over to my channel. I have a very small channel. The Meaning of Catholic is so gracious to me because they let me come on, and they have definitely more subscribers than I do. So if you would, please subscribe to my channel. I cover a variety of topics, really, with the goal of trying to integrate the will and the intellect in a way that sort of helps us all live lives where we are living our faith in a very true, authentically Catholic external fashion, while also forming our interior life. And so I cover a lot of stuff with abortion just because that's kind of my wheelhouse and I love it, but also culture, church issues. I do have an occasional live show that I'm going to be doing more often called The Apostles' Creed, where I cover current events and and talk about what I'm seeing about usually a pro-life stuff. That's usually and feminism. Those are the things that I really get upset about, is feminism and everything related to that.
Feminism.
Feminism and Meninism. I should talk about Meninism or something. But yeah, so that's the bulk of my channel. I do have an episode coming out with Marky Mark that was in here earlier from Tradman, talking about what it's like to struggle with infertility from a male's perspective. And then, so he opens up with me talking about that. I have another interview talking with somebody who is a writer for, I believe, the American Conservative and some other great outlets, talking about discernment and proper discernment. And I have some other really awesome interviews coming up here soon. So feel free to subscribe over there. And I also have a Patreon. So if you guys really like my work and you want to join me for $5 a month, or around that or more, whatever you want, you're welcome to join. And hopefully we get some more stuff going in there as well. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Do you have any last minute comments?
Only last comment is, stay tuned for our next episode, because I know I gave a kind of a hard question tonight, but that was kind of a random question. I have a little bit harder ones next time, but they're not scholastic. They're more cultural ones that you'll hear. And so I think you'll probably be able to answer them pretty easily.
Awesome. And if you have not ever, if you're not a guild member, feel free to become a guild member for the Meaning of Catholic. If you like what this lay apostolate is doing to form families in the faith, consider becoming a guild member and supporting the great work of this apostolate and Tim Flanders. We would so greatly appreciate that. We hope you have a wonderful evening. God bless you.